Um, just in the beginning, some housekeeping points. Please to keep your mics muted while the conversation is going on. We have a very interesting conversation lined up here. And if you have questions, please do put it in the chat, in the Q&A chat, and we will pick them up. There'll be Q&A session in the end, so we have some time kept aside. I would request all of you to start putting in the chat where you're coming from, your name. Good to know which city you're joining from. So let's get the conversation going there. Also, if there is any anything burning, any issue, raise it in the chat and the moderators will take it forward. We have roughly about 60 minutes for this conversation, about 20 minutes for questions. There may be 5 minutes here, there. So bear with us. And I'm really hoping that we pick up some insights from this lovely lineup of speakers. I will get into introductions in a bit. But before that, those who are new to Catalyst 2030, a word of introduction to the coalition. Catalyst 2030 is a very large global coalition of social entrepreneurs and innovators with about 3,000 organizations as members. We also have Catalyst 2030 India chapter, which was set up in 2021, and we have about 300 members here. As I said, it's a growing coalition. So if you are interested, knowing more about Catalyst 2030, you can either go to catalyst2030.net, which is the website, or just put it in the chat and our team will reach out, and there is a nomination process to become member. We can talk about that. About Catalyzing Change Week, where this panel is a form of, a part of. It's a flagship program of Catalyst 2030, happens once a year. It's a 5-day long event, hundreds of sessions globally. Today is the last day of this year, and very honored and privileged to anchor this session with you. What do we have at hand here as the topic is very interesting because, you know, a country born out of a people's movement coming together is not new to us, right? We're very used to people rallying together, making, you know, mission-oriented groups, large coalitions, collaborators, different names, industry trade bodies. And we often have one mission that we go with, you know, looking after the members' interests and so on and so forth. It's slightly different in the area of social impact, and the way we are seeing, and most recent last 2 years, is the problems facing us are much larger than what we can deal with individually or as individual organizations. So there is more interest and keenness and need to come together and work together. And wouldn't it be great if we do it by design, right? So you're thrown into a pandemic. Obviously, everyone comes together out of a dire need. But how great it will be to be prepared, right? With the right skill set, some method to this madness, some insights, some learnings, to be prepared for the next big issue, next big disaster, God forbid, happens. But if there is one, we should be ready with some learnings. That's essentially the idea behind this session. We also, within Catalyst, there are a number of collaborators working, and it's a good opportunity for us to learn from each other. And finally, we also see this as a growing body of knowledge, right? We, from the beginning, we were told to stay ahead as individual, or, you know, run an individual organization to its, you know, grow wealth or impact or whatever, but as an individual organization. Very, you know, seldom we talk about what cohesion is, what coming together is, what is greater than us. And since it's becoming a need, we thought, why don't we, you know, there's an opportunity to cull out knowledge from some running coalitions, successful coalitions. And that's the idea here. So 3 lovely panelists, young leaders, and I'm going to get into introductions, very brief introduction, because questions and answers will bring out more. So I will start with Kanika. Kanika Sinha is convener of Commutiny, the youth collective, and also Varta Leap, which is a large coalition of youth development focused organizations. Kanika has about 18 plus years of experience in youth development. She has to her credit really remarkable work, some interesting work that I like, particularly on youth rights and duties. She studied MA in social development. She studied in University of Sussex and Delhi University. Warm welcome to you, Kanika. Thanks for making time for this. Khushbu Awasthi, she is the Chief Operating Officer of Shiksha Lokam. She's also the co-lead of India Education Collaborative and co-founder of Mantra for Change. Khushbu is a Shaw Fellow. She's studied in Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Warm welcome to you, Khushbu. Thanks for making time. And finally, but not the least, Anant Vijay Singh. Anant is a young leader working with Dasra. He is leading and managing very interesting collaborative called India Rebuild Fund. It's a collaborative of funders and philanthropists. And will be very interesting to hear from him, his insights. Anant has deep interest in social impact himself, and he is done Masters in Science from Vellore Institute of Technology. So thanks for joining. Welcome. And I'll dive right in. So my first question is, let's begin with Kanika. Kanika, what's your story? What's your story of Varta Leap, the coalition that you're running, and where you're heading?
So I think, Sunish, you've sort of already, kind of pointed out, I think the genesis of most coalitions and collectives comes from the recognition that, we can't do this alone. And I think when that happens, this sort of need and desire to come together with a group of people is just, that becomes kind of the imperative. And I think that's true for most of us, just that the challenges that we're dealing with, everything that we're trying to solve for is so complex. And so that is true. I think also that's true as equally true for Commutiny, which is also a collective, as well as Varta Leap. But I think also this sort of just recognizing that as human beings, as change makers, but as human beings, we need togetherness and we need community and we need learning and we need growth. And I think that's equally been a driver for us at Commutiny and Varta Leap. And I think that's very much also a part of the story. So even when we began in our early days, in our early formulations, this Commutiny, the youth collective, the idea of bringing together, aggregating, and learning from sort of the best experiences in youth work, in youth-centric development. I think that really was pushing us and pulling us in a way together. Ki kuch mazedar ho raha hai, there's people who are doing similar work, and this is a field that still needs to take shape. There is a co-creation needed there. I think that's the other exciting element when it comes to working together and being in coalitions and collectives, is the potential to do something together, to create something new together. And I think those have all been sort of, the initial key drivers, both for both spaces that I'm talking about. Varta Leap, which came together a couple of years, about 3 years ago. I think there, certainly by that stage, we were looking at youth-centric development, so many organizations already together as part of that collective. And then when you frame a mission that says every youth a Jagrik, every space nurturing Jagriks, it suddenly turns things on its head. And you realize that you have to move beyond your echo chambers. You have to move beyond experiences that are familiar. We have to start talking to people who can align with that mission, who believe in that mission, but have a completely different vantage point. And I think that's what Varta Leap, that cross-sectoral intergenerational space is just that, is multiple viewpoints, looking at, examining that complexity from different angles, And, also like saying, hey, we have a lot to learn. So there is this, we talk about seeing, being, and doing together. And actually, I know, there's a little video, Sunish, so I'm going to let that also talk here. But just the idea that we need to, from these different sort of viewing points, we want to frame a way in which we see the world, in which we want to address problems that we are trying to solve for together. We want to just be together. We need community, as I said, we need learning together. And the idea of, yes, we need to, there is an impact we're here to create. We need to shift the needle. We want youth centricity in every space. How does that happen tangibly? That's the doing part of what, that's the story really of why we came together and what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Kanika. And I also see very interesting wordplay here, Vartaleap and Jagrek. So do you want to say a little more about Jagrek, for example?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. Thanks. So Jagrek is, it's a word that it's Jagruk Nagrik, and it represents a self-awakened, aware, active citizen. So there is a story in the word that represents a young person who is, also transforming their self as they are transforming their world. And so there is then a certain design and experience that one looks at creating when working with young people. And so Jagrek has that special meaning. And the idea of Vartaleap was, how do conversations take us to another level? So it's not just to have conversations, but also these conversations allow us to leap together in a direction that we may not have charted before.
Fascinating. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Kanika. Let me move to Khushbu. Khushbu, what's the story of your work, especially the India Education Collaborative?
Sure. Thanks, Sunish. And it was lovely listening to Kanika, and I'm sure Anand has a fascinating story too. And Sunish, if you would kindly allow, I would like to share this story of the Punjab Education Collective with this group of audience, considering we have spent 3 years shaping this collective and have really taken action on the ground. And the story was, and actually that was our first stint with a collective as an organization, as an individual. So I think it was in 2017 that as 2 organizations, Mantra for Change and Shiksha Lokam, both of us work in systemic education transformation. We work with the government, and we started asking ourselves that what would it actually take to maybe create and nurture an ecosystem where more organizations are talking about systems change, they're talking about systemic education transformation. And with that as the fundamental question, we started a program called Edumentum, which took the shape of an incubator. And we as of today, we have some 40 organizations as part of our ecosystem. So as part of our cohort 1 of Edumentum, we met Simranpreet, who is the founder of Sanji Sikhya, which is a Punjab-based organization. And they were just shaping it up. It was a small team, with less than 5 team members. And, in 2018, we were sitting in a base camp, and they said, we have this very interesting vision. We want to shape Punjab, and I quote, we want to shape Punjab into a land of hope, courage, and possibilities. Right? And there was this purity of intent. There's this passion that's coming out. And we had a very different hat at that point in time. And we were thinking, okay, so how do we enable Simranpreet to carry out this vision, to actually work towards this vision? And in subsequent discussions, the journey was, it was very organic. We had these base camps, we had these meetings, dialogues. And I think it was in early 2019 when Sanji Sikhya had also taken a little bit of an organizational shape. There was more stability. We said, what do we do to accelerate their journey towards their vision? And to just give you a context, Punjab has 19,000 schools. And in 2017, in one of the ASA reports, we saw that it was one of the poorest performing states in terms of education indicators. There were more than 70% of high schoolers who couldn't even put their state on the map of India. And foundational literacy numeracy, definitely it was very poor. So we said, definitely there is a need for speed, and we have to move fast. And we were sitting with Manu and his team to put together this idea and saying, what are their strengths, the typical sort, what are their strengths, what are the limiting factors? And I think that was the moment when we said, hey, what is limiting for Sanji Sikhi as an organization? We already have that as Mantra for Change, as Shiksha Lokam, and many of our partners in the ecosystem. Sanji Sikhi has this deep insight of Punjab as a context. Mantra for Change has this program design, program research, and implementation experience. Shiksha Lokam has this experience of tech design, where we know how to leverage tech for implementation at scale. Why can't we just work together as one team? Why don't we shape a collective? I mean, for us, it was very organic and very obvious at that point in time. And I mean, we had no big research telling us that whether collectives can work, not work, but we just said, let's dive in. That's how social entrepreneurs tend to work, I think. So we just dived in, and and actually that led to many interesting questions. We said, now that three of us are together, if we have to approach the Department of School Education in Punjab, what else, what kind of capabilities do we need? Who else do we bring into the mix to be able to cater to a wider problem statement? Then we reached out to Samarthya, which happens to be another Edumentee, and they have a fantastic expertise in community and parental participation in education. So we got them into the mix. So four of us, then we approached the Department of School Education. I mean, that's how, one thing led to another. We started the research on ground. We started finding what are the problem statements the actors, the teachers, the school leaders are facing. What do we do about it? Took our suggestions back to the department, started co-creating with them. So I think it's been fantastic. But at that point in time, it was more like, given the, like Sunish, in the opening you said, given the enormity of the problem, it looked very obvious that we should come together. And we did. And 3 years down the line, as of today, I'm very proud to share that Punjab is ranked #1 in the National Achievement Survey of the country, and not for 1 year, for 2 consecutive years. So I think that's the power of collective that we are seeing live. I mean, we'll come to the challenges. There's so many stories, but I'm sure Sunish will have questions around this.
Thanks. Yes, I will. And thank you, Khushbu. What a lovely story. And by the way, if I'm not wrong, Punjab has very few civil society organizations, like organized sector, right?
Yes.
But if you look at the citizen action in the times of stress, Punjab is the first one that springs up.
Absolutely.
Right?
There's so much of community spirit. It's part of their values, their culture, the way Punjabis have grown up, right?
Yeah. So to kindle it and organize people with a method, I think it's great. And thanks for sharing that story. Very inspiring. Let me move to Anand. Anand, what's been your story?
Yeah, no, thanks, Sunish, and thanks, Kanika and Khushbu. I think a lot of interesting things that kind of also feed into what I want to talk about. And like Sunish mentioned right up front, the COVID ke time pe a lot of organizations had to come together, and a lot of immediate sort of movement was generated. So even Dasra, we initiated a relief campaign and supported about 152 organizations. And around that time, we realized that, which has been true for years, but I think became most obvious, that organizations, small organizations led by leaders who were closest to the communities, who were from the most vulnerable communities, actually were holding the line at that time and have continued to do so. And so there was a emerging thought around how do we support these folks. In addition, I think there was also a rising understanding of the lack of inclusion even within philanthropy and within the sector, right? There is a metro-centric movement. I noticed on the chat somebody's asked कि talk Hindi में हो सकती है कि नहीं. So Rita ji, I think इस बार तो हिंदी में नहीं हो सकती, but perhaps something to keep in mind for next time. But I think just this understanding, as well as intent from some funders who were further along in their giving journey to be a part of something bigger, kind of led us to launch the Rebuild India Fund, wherein it's, of course, pooled funding with, of course, an anchor funder called the Tarsaria Foundation based in the US. And the idea is, how do we, at scale, so work with 100 organizations every year, 100 new organizations, give them 5 years worth of commitments for funding with general operating grants that they decide how they can use, because they are indeed closest to the problems. and kind of know what is required, as well as how do we kind of leverage this as a platform and be that bridge builder where of course funders as well as nonprofits as well as the larger ecosystem kind of come together on this issue, right? And I guess that touches upon like elements therefore of like togetherness and co-creation and identifying that we don't have to do everything, right? So how do you leverage the larger ecosystem to add value to the grassroots? So that's a little bit of the story, I think, and of course we'll get deeper into it as we go along.
Great, thanks, Anand. And I think, I see your story very similar and different because we, often the popular conversation in nonprofits is, well, won't it be great if the funders walk the same speed and direction as nonprofits? And you represent that collective, so would be great conversation to go forward with, when we talk challenges and things like that. And I also see there is similarity in the three of you in the way you came together out of a need rather than anything else. So it was not an idea that, okay, let's come up with another group and then go forward, but there was an inherent need in there. Let's take a moment, and I have a small video clip, Anant, on your work, and so would love to play that. It's a small clip. Indrani, can we play the video, please?
Yes. Let me know if you're able to hear. You're able to hear, right?
No, Indrani.
One second. Shubham, are you able to allow me to share my sound?
Just 1 second, Indrani. Please repeat. Sorry. Hello.
Yeah, I don't see a space where I can share my sound. Are you able to share it from your side? Otherwise, you
I
have the
just need the
video.
third video. I have the first two videos. I need this one.
Okay, no problem. Can I share my sound? I do not share sound otherwise.
Actually, there is no option to control that separately. You should be able to share the screen with sound. Just,
Okay, so why
Are
just
you
start
able to
sharing
hear?
again, please.
Indrani,
Are you able to hear?
No, it is just the video without audio.
let's figure this out separately. Let me move on with
Sorry.
the conversation.
Sure, sure.
So you all are working with leaders, I'm assuming, with immense amount of success already to their credit, each of you. That seems to be the constitution of each of your collaborators. And I'm not sure it's easy and how easy it is to bring such strong personalities together, keep them together. So what's, in your experience, been the biggest challenge keeping the coalition together, and how you overcoming it? And we can begin with Anand. Do you want to share yours first?
Yeah, I think we are a relatively young coalition, so our challenges therefore are still hopefully they are ahead of us or hopefully behind us. But I think for me, when I think about challenges, I think it, at least as you start designing for it, it has been about building that shared language. And because now you're talking about a place where funders as well as nonprofits and other folks are coming in and kind of engaging, right? So building that shared language as well as ensuring that the decision making is clear, right? And so for example, when we talk about shared language, a huge focus for us has been on thinking through what is the tenet or what are the key tenets of rebuild, and therefore for us it's like proximate leadership or leadership from the communities. It is about the work being driven by and being centered in the communities, and lastly it is about the idea of vulnerability and how vulnerability can be so intersectional and kind of have layers and layers upon it, and kind of then making this the language that everybody is familiar with. So I think that has been a big one, and I know we perhaps want to get into how we do decision making and all a little later, but I think I want to stop there.
Thanks. Thanks, Anandan. I have more to ask on that. I think very important point you're making about vocabulary, language. But before we get there, I think the team has sorted out the sound issue. Indrani, please go ahead and play the video.
Shubham?
Just a couple of more seconds, please. I'm on it. That issue is again there. Sorry for the trouble. Just we have to
No,
skip
no,
this
no
one.
problem.
Sorry.
You folks sort it out, and we'll
Yes, sorry. I think
sort
you're not
it.
able to share sound. Are you not able to hear sound when we are playing the video? No.
Well,
Actually, that option is grayed out for some reason.
Option is not there for sharing sound.
okay, Indrani, give me a prompt once you've sorted this out. No?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So Anand, just coming back to your point, and I'm also assuming that the organizations, when they've come together in your collective, they've already had, to their credit, certain vocabulary, certain success that they've seen in using certain words, right? Even sometimes stating a mission could be marginally or fundamentally different, in one to the other. How did you manage to bring alignment there?
So also I think one is like Sunish was saying, it definitely has to do with the organizations, but for me, shared vocabulary actually starts all the way from the point of where the funding is coming from. So you start at ensuring that the funders are kind of understanding what exactly we are trying to do here, and using standardized communications campaigns, ensuring that whenever we are kind of talking to them, you're highlighting that these are the fundamental kind of truths for us, right? And then kind of through our process of actually identifying and selecting portfolio organizations for the Rebuild India Fund, kind of reinforcing that and highlighting that, like, these are the things we look for. Our kind of selection process does not include a proposal. It includes, it has a 2-hour phone call essentially, or a Zoom call, where we go through the elements of, like, please tell us about leadership, and who are the people and how are the communities kind of involved in your leadership, in your board, in your programming, etc. And then post kind of selection through workshops and capacity building conversations and so on, kind of delving deeper into it. So I feel like it's more of a ongoing process than kind of any one piece. I don't know if that answered the question you were raising.
No, it does. It does. Thanks for answering that, and laying the process out a little bit, sharing that. I'll move to Kanika. Kanika, what in your experience has been the challenge? I know you run a pretty large coalition, and coalition also before Vartalip wasn't new to you, right? Community itself is a collective. So you want to share one or two big challenges?
So I think, more than, yes, so Commutiny was also about 100 organizations. Vartalip is about 160 at this point. And I think not so much challenge, but over the years also just learning, and the challenge, I think, is in trying to remember that learning as you're working every day, operating every day. And this learning is not just for someone who's facilitating these coalitions, but also I think just as members of coalitions, wherever we may be, and therefore the kinds of expectations we have of coalitions. Just remembering what sort of a diverse group you may be sitting with and working with. I think what we look at as challenges are just, are coming from expectations as organizations. You're assuming that you will, this is a challenge for you because you're not used to this, because in an organization, you would have been able to give people orders and someone would have done something, or you would raise money as a, with a funder because they understand exactly what your mission is, or you have a process to resolve a conflict. You can hold someone accountable. And we have the same expectations of coalitions. And I think that's the bigger challenge. So I think there's a rewiring that we need both as facilitators of these coalitions as well as just as members also. I think that responsibility rests with all sides. And so, just knowing that there are these paradoxes that you have to constantly hold. So like, hand and heart, is one way that we like to call it, which is some people are driven by and coming here really for the doing. What is the impact? What are the numbers? How many are we reaching out to? The idea of scale and idea of just, reaching that many more because you are so many is what really excites and drives people. And some people are here just for the being, because we need that community and we want solidarity, we want learning, whatever it may be. Balancing that can be difficult because someone's will periodically get put off by whatever that experience that one process offers. So how do you offer space enough of all of that? I think the white spaces are challenging. Not everything is defined. No one has a KRA accountability, as I was saying. Who's going to fundraise for a coalition? Who's going to amplify? When I go out and speak and I get opportunities to represent my work, do I go as coalition? Do I go as my organization? Some of those conflicts. And if we accept that that's a conflict, I think it's easier to find a way around it. And maybe we also realize it's not so much of a conflict and, sort of it's easier, it's possible to deal with. I think the other one is accepting also this whole thing of primary and secondary membership. If we can just accept, we must, that everyone has a primary membership with their own organizations. And so if there is a time of crisis, if there is a huge opportunity, or anything that draws them back into their primary membership space, we have to accept it and recognize that it is a reality and embrace it. And coalitions, collectives are typically always secondary membership. And so with the time and the love and the energy that anyone is giving in that secondary membership space, what can we expect to happen? And so to have expectations that are of a coalition and not of an organization. And I don't necessarily mean fewer expectations. I mean different expectations. So I think one is just accepting who we are and then working differently, not working as an organization then. And I think the other is also the switch around, collaboration and co-creation. So I think everyone comes into a coalition with the idea, with this great sort of enthusiasm to be able to do more. But there's a gear shifting around how do we use this space better to do something differently from what I have already been doing. So while I can come here to scale my program that is wonderful, very effective, has demonstrated great impact, that is one possibility of what we can do in a coalition. But actually, the reason for that coalition is possibly to be able to do something that I just cannot do as my own organization. And to be able to let go a little bit then of, this whole, I think scale maybe is the right word. I think everyone's so enticed by scale, and therefore what coalitions can offer is scale. And so you want to come in with what they have and say, okay, now it'll go to so many more. But learning, just responding differently from what we know. I think all of that maybe, and you do that by co-creating something that will reach very large numbers. So I'm not, that still it has to be a North Star for us. But how do we I think just letting go a little bit of what we already know and trying to discover what we don't know together. Maybe that's, another sort of challenge or area that we need to.
So very interesting. I think some of these maybe interesting for other coalitions also to test and try. I know that you naturally come from a space of creating generative, regenerative spaces, and that skill set is inherently there in your existing team. So bringing it it comes in easy for you, and also understanding of how this bonding happens is easier, while something which is differently sort of mission driven in a different space, and that kind of coalition requires that skills to to be developed. So maybe there is a role between coalitions also to play with each other and from each other. So thanks, Kanika. Khushbu, let me ask you, what have you seen? Education is not a new space, right? It's a sector where there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of success also in the civil society that currently is there. What have you seen as challenges that you faced with?
I suppose it's very similar to what Anant and Kanika talked about. Definitely, I'll build on what Anant talked about, this shared language. Because we are in education, the language, maybe the shared language exists, but still there has to be enough time that needs to be given for a meaning-making process, for being able to see together. Because unless you are seeing together and seeing the same thing with the same understanding, you will not be able to come to a consensus on what could be the approach to be solving together, right? And the consequence of that is the speed of action gets compromised. You have to go slow because meaning making is a time consuming process. And in that at times gets very frustrating. So the challenge is to let the entire collective know that, it's okay to go slow. Actually going slow is going fast, because the moment there's an alignment, we'll be able to move much faster without friction. So that initial time and coming to terms with this slow speed is one of the biggest challenges that we have sensed. Actually, Kanika brought out another interesting point, which I also had in mind, is about this. While the leadership may be very well aligned, we are, yes, all gung-ho about this taking a collective approach. But the people on ground, the team members who are actually there, talking to the government stakeholders, talking to the school leaders, visiting schools, they face this day-to-day challenge because of lack of such processes that that typical organization will have. How do you hold somebody responsible if they're not, maybe coming with the right tools to the field at a required time? So because of this, a lot of frictions start arising at that point. And then people start falling back to, it's very tempting to fall back into your routine, saying that, oh, it's okay, I'll work in silo, I'll work as it's okay to work with my team within a collective. So as leaders, I think that's one thing that we are very, very conscious of. We have struggled with that initially. And then over the years, we have created these spaces where we come together. We make sure that we model out these behaviors. We emphasize that ultimately, it is about working together. Otherwise, why are you doing this? So that becomes very, very important to articulate. Third biggest challenge that I would especially like to call out on this forum is, I think, the way funding works in our country today. It's very programmatic, very project based. There's a lot of questions. I mean, I think 99% of the conversations that I have been part of, such fundraising conversations, people will ask, so how do you know that your action has led to this outcome shift? Right? So funders are still operating in that domain. There's a lot of debate around this attribution versus contribution. And in a collective, it gets further complicated. Because then whether it's Sanjay Sikia or Mantra or Shikshalokam or Samarthya, who is getting the attribution? So just changing that paradigm to say, hey, it is a contribution game. It is not an attribution game. And I mean, we have been talking to philanthropists, we have been talking to funders, and thankfully there are such like-minded funders. In fact, Anant's presence on this panel itself is an amazing proof of how even funders are now thinking in this direction. Yeah, so I think I'll stop there, Sunish, with these top three challenges.
Sure, very interesting. I like the point that you made about while leaders who take a call of joining a coalition or running a coalition are all on board, but their teams may not be. And it's a very real problem, right? Because you have a certain architecture, hierarchy, incentive, growth with every individual who's been a part of your team. And unless there is a thinking or a mindset that trickles into the organization through and through at different levels, that here's a dominant shift that we want. Here's a major culture shift, and we, as an organization, we want to be a part of that. Then possibly it will trickle down better. And again, as I see it, it's the role of that leader or leadership to make that happen, make it seep into the organization. The other, of course, popular question on funding and funders. And I'm just, like you said, I'm also hoping that while there's a set of funders who've come together in a coalition, also realizing that, if they need a coalition, obviously sectors also need coalitions and need to be supported. I'm also, in my experience, I'm also facing a slightly different challenge of logistics. So while they're few and far between, there's still some people, like you also said, Khushbu, that who are starting to see the need of coalitions and funding coalitions. But when it comes to the process of it, there often is a host organization. There often is a holding set of people. There often is a secretariat which is supported by one organization. And it may optically, it may look like this the same organization, which is anyway strong, is receiving the fund. Let's say that's the way to do it.
Absolutely.
The other is our current architecture does not allow those funds to be passed on, especially if the funds are foreign funds, right?
Yeah.
So there may be structural and process related issues also, which prevent the funders from this kind of setup. I think it's a journey that we all need to make, but this conversation helps in taking those steps. I touched upon dominant culture, so let me come to that. I think my assumption also here is that each of your collaborators has identified a popular dominant behavior culture which sits in the sector, which needs to change, which is not working for us, right? We've seen rote learning, for example, in education hasn't worked. Why we moved from literacy to education first, so education to learning. Similarly in skills. So what is that dominant culture that you hope to shift in your respective work? And let me ask that question first to you, Khushbu.
Very interesting question, Sunish. I think definitely, like you said, in education, there's so many, there's a rich body of knowledge that exists, right? And everybody says that education means this, or it should look like this, or children should be doing this, then it is quality education. So quality as a term has multiple interpretation. So I think with our effort to collective building, it really helps us amplify the voices and also build the richness of the perspectives. For example, everybody, you go to any government official as of today and you say schools need to be improved. Yes, they need to be improved. When you double click on that and you say, hey, what does this improvement look like? What does this improvement mean? Does this mean that children should be learning by doing, the head and heart and hand conversation that Kanika brought in? Or does it mean to be changing certain pedagogical practices so that 21st century skills get built in the children? So if I am going alone as an organization, right, I can easily be ignored. I'm one voice. But now imagine if there are these 100+ organizations that are bringing these perspectives and are corroborating and saying that, no, this is exactly what the education system should work towards this in the current context. It really makes it puts a demand. It strengthens our voice. And I think Catalyst 2030 is a perfect example of that, right? Like so many social entrepreneurs putting their best practices, the whole report that we have put together in terms of transforming pathways to education. This is just so powerful, and it helps shift such cultures in a very tangible way, right? And one very interesting story that maybe I would like to share with this group here is, recently we set up a coalition at a national level around the Vidya Amrit Mahotsav. It's a national campaign where teachers and school leaders were encouraged to share their innovations and micro improvements that they carry out. And the initial imagination was to shape this as a competition. right? And all of us know what competition does to an ecosystem. So just that small shift to saying that not from a competition, let's move to a festival narrative, make it a mahotsav, because festival has the spirit of sharing, of coming together, of joy, of really sharing your best practices with each other, sharing your resources with each other. So can we move to a festival narrative? And that really changed how this whole campaign worked out, how organizations took it to their own districts, their own blocks and clusters. So I think these are some of the subtle but very, very dangerous, so to say, traits that exist within the education system, because all of us are part of the same society. So just coming as collective, making our voices very, very strong, it really helps.
Yeah, and what a lovely point about Mahotsav. I think, I always believe that what information and knowledge can't do, inspiration can, right? So you just build a moment of inspiration, and people will take up and sit up and listen. Also, I think it increases engagement, right? A lot of
Absolutely.
yarn doesn't necessarily promise engagement.
I mean, just to add, Sunish, a very interesting point. When we were setting this up, it was led by NCERT, and in one of the initial conversations, like, some 1,000 improvement stories will come. That's a success metric. As of today, we have more than 5.9 lakhs micro improvements that have been submitted and are visible. Right. So that's the power of just shaping that narrative well.
Absolutely. Anand, what about you? It's you in the funding paradigm. Is there a dominant culture, dominant shift that you're seeing happening? Is there part of your mission?
Sorry, Sunish, I seem to have dropped off for a bit, but could you repeat that question once?
Yeah, I was talking the same point that Khushbu answered. What is that dominant culture in funding environment that you propose to shift, or you're trying to shift?
Yeah, I think it's a twofold. One is, of course, like I spoke about in the beginning, the need to have a conversation and have about shifting the focus to either what you may call the front line or to the proximity. Where are the issues, and therefore where are the solutions, kind of thing. But and that I think continues. But a bigger one, and perhaps something that is not necessarily COVID sort of activated, is the idea of the way power works in philanthropy. And I think everybody either listening or on the panel is familiar with this, right? There is the idea of somebody has the resources, and then they dictate, how some things should happen on the ground, and therefore the question of, like, how do you flip that? Because if the people who are closest to the problems need to be solving those problems, then they need to be in charge of their own decision making, right? And I think there was a lovely example that came out at the last Catalyst 2030 gathering that I was at, right? Like, around terminology such as top-down decision making, bottom-up decision making, which implies that there's a top and bottom, and how one could start talking about that as inside out and outside in perspectives. But yeah, I think that is definitely one of the things that the Rebuild India Fund aims to try and make a shift away from. So, kind of, how do you change that narrative through bringing in the idea of participation, through kind of enabling the folks who are doing the work to be making the decisions, right? And I think it works in two ways, two opposite ways. I think one is, like Khushbu was saying, there's the critical mass of having enough people and enough voices kind of saying the right things and saying the same things and driving a narrative, but also the power of champions, I want to say, who can stand up and, who talk about either be it NGO champions who showcase, what does it look like to be working, with the most vulnerable, and how they are doing it in a manner that is accountable, but in a truly transformational way, as well as, of course, funding champions who can stand up and be like, these are the best practices when it comes to giving, and kind of these are the people you should be looking up to when it comes to like working with trust with in a granting relationship, while of course bringing accountability and so on. And so I think these are the two sort of elements for us that are really big in terms of shaping some of this or shifting this dominant culture that exists in philanthropy today. And how does Rebuild kind of become this model which others can look at and perhaps take some learning from, if not a lot.
Right, and I also hear, in the same point that you made, I hear a lot of conversation about localization, proximate leadership, and how do organizations fund. So let me put you on spot, Anand. So in your coalition, do you have funders who are now starting to think about funding coalitions?
So funders, I think, so we love to hedge our bets by talking about the funder journey, right? So of course, the folks who are anchoring this are way along on that journey, and therefore they're like, you need to invest in a larger ecosystem play in order for people to be people at the ground or on the front lines to really see that change. So that would be, I would say, more foundation, family-driven foundations, and so on. I think there are a few CSR organizations who are definitely keen to join in the coalition, support the more capacity building aspects of it. But again, like you said, they're few and far in between. I think the journey is still a long one ahead.
And in just dragging that question a little, so what would instill maximum confidence into a funder if they are looking at, let's say, a group of organizations coming together with a mission? What would instill maximum confidence? Would it be the structure, stability, or the constitution of the group? What would motivate them to look at them as a promising, compelling proposition?
Yeah, I think what we've seen is that it ranges on that the head to heart spectrum, I want to say, wherein folks who are again further along on their journey would be like, what are your accountability practices? How is the governance happening? Who is making the decisions? What is that flow of information? Whereas folks who give more from their heart are perhaps in some ways earlier or perhaps more open on their journeys are then like, but who are the communities? What are those challenges? Where in the country is this happening, and so on? So it ties back to, I think, having all of the information, of course, and putting it out there, and kind of the importance of that narrative change, communication, and the kind of that effort, I think, here cannot be underestimated.
Got it. Thanks, Anand. Let me ask Kanika. So Kanika, is there a shift that you're hoping to make?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think just there is a mission that drives us, and so this legitimacy of young people in taking leadership in sort of every sort of space that they occupy. I think that's the culture shift in a way that we are trying to bring about, and that's why working with different sort of stakeholders is key to that. So I mean, what I also wanted to kind of bring focus to was also the dominant cultures that one is trying to shift within coalitions through the coalition, so also the culture of the coalition itself. So by virtue of being in a coalition, you're already shifting some dominant cultures. One is, for instance, when you're bringing together, in the case of Varta Leap, where the attempt has been to have people have a cross-sectoral coalition. So it's not just a group of people who have the same mission and do similar work, but we're also saying, can we have government stakeholders? Can we have donor agencies? Can we have UN agencies? Can we have people from the corporate space? And we're getting there. We're not there yet, but that's that intent. I think even that process of bringing people together changes the culture in how these interactions happen. When civil society talks to government versus when we talk as allies together, I think, there's a different approach, and there's strength in both, and both are needed. But I think these are all, so I think the point I'm trying to make is that coalitions in themselves are shifting cultures. Apart from what we're trying to do, the narrative shifts we are bringing, or the norm shifts we are bringing through our missions. That is, I mean, that's a given. That's what we are trying to do, right? But I think there's a way of being that we are changing, a way of working that we are changing, because we're trying to do this together. Even power, decision making, so many things, and also through how we are constituted. So we are trying to be, we see ourselves as an intergenerational coalition. So while our interest is in young people, we also want to be able to learn how to work intergenerationally. So there is, there's always this dialogue around how do young people then lead. Okay, so everyone moves out and says, okay, now young people lead. But when young people have never had the opportunity to lead before, you're only setting them up for failure. What in our culture or our education has ever allowed young people to lead? And so why not intergenerational? What's so terrible about that? And I think that's, I just wanted to kind of spotlight that point in this context.
I have a counter, not a counter, just a devil's advocate, right? So I'm also beginning to believe that, and gross generalization, right? I believe that in any organized group, the average age should go down, right?
Sure.
Like in this group, I'm spoiling the average age. So sorry about that, but I'm just saying that, seriously speaking, is there a thinking around that dominant culture, that everything which is meaningful, intellectual, thinking related, future related, sometimes you will see gray heads, right? You'll see a lot of old people, very few young people. So that's one point. The other point is when you say intergenerational, I think at one level it sounds great. The other is, I think just the tenets and the aspects of leadership also are changing with new times, right? So, for example, some of the aspects which was with the conventions which I have grown with of leadership, maybe just outdated.
Sure.
So does that fiddle with this intergenerational? I mean, is there a balance that you're looking at, balance of intergenerational, but also having young people have their say, and because they possibly know the present and future better in many ways? Do you also face that?
Yeah. No, absolutely, Sunish, and I 100% agree also about just reducing the average age. I don't think there's, I think hopefully a lot more people are thinking like that. I think what I meant by intergenerational is, I think the fact that, so, coalition, that we go back to that first question of why we came together. I think that expressed need that has brought so many people together is coming from unfulfilled experiences, perhaps, or unmet goals elsewhere. And I think that experience, that wisdom of success and failure is equally important at the table without using it as power. I think that's the thing, is how do we, so to me, it's not about age, it's about how do we navigate power, and what are we going to keep using as power, right? What does age have to do with all of this? Yes, I mean, so I think that's really how I would see it. And I think if that's something that we are all conscious of, aware of, and at the same time aware of, yes, there is a point after which many of our experiences are also obsolete. We will not keep hanging on to them. And you have to allow those voices and experiences that are current, and experiences that can see into the future much more easily than others, to occupy those spaces. But I don't think it should become a bad thing to have this. I feel like we see it we want to see it in black and white. It's got to be young. I think it's just, what is the experience? It doesn't matter what age it is, really.
Sure. And I just noticed Harsh Jaitley is here. I'd love to draw him in. Harsh, would you like to contribute to this conversation? Thanks for joining.
Shubham, can you add him as a panelist?
Okay.
Just 1 second, Indran.
We'll wait for your inputs. Meanwhile, let me just ask a very simple question. So would you want to share a quick success story in each of your collaborators? So far, I know it's a long haul, but and Khushbu, I think you alluded to that a little. But anything that instilled a lot of excitement and energy as a milestone that you might have hit. Anand?
Yeah, I think for us, like we spoke about the dominant culture and this power and all of that, right? But for us, I think a great starting point has been like we're starting to see now the creation of what you might call safe spaces, right? Wherein, of course, organizations can engage with each other freely, but also organizations can engage with funders and kind of hear from them, and more importantly, have the funders kind of hear from organizations. And I think now in the beginning of March, end of Feb, we had an event where we had one of our funders, Sonal Patel, who from the GMSP Foundation in the UK, kind of had a very free flowing conversation with some of the portfolio members about organizational well-being. And I think it was for us that is the first step, right? Like you have a space, it's a safe space, you speak your mind, you exchange views, and that's kind of where the bridge building starts, right? And for us, I think that's one of the early successes and something we would definitely want to kind of build on, along with, of course, like your earlier question, Sunish, have more and more funders kind of start moving towards the idea of funding collectives, funding more proximity, funding, not just going standalone in your own little silos, with, of course, all of the diligence and credibility and so on that they bring. But yeah.
Thanks, Anand. Harsh, welcome. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, such an interesting conversation that I was writing so many points in that. In fact, your last question, Sunish, about success stories. There are a lot of, our life is full of success stories, especially when you're operating in a space like Vani, where you can work on contested areas with the government when you are collective. Like today, or even 10 years back, no single organization had that much of courage to raise any question related to FCRA with the government. But as a collective, if you go, with a lot of experiences, like when we talk to them, we take a lot of experience from our grassroots members. So they listen. And there is some sort of I will give you an example in Maharashtra. Few years back, the charity commissioner came out with an idea saying that, if you put welfare or something, or democracy or something, or human right or something, they had a problem with that. But collectively, when that issue was raised, they listened to it. So definitely there are a lot of success stories. Yeah, and there is also a concern point which Anant was also raising, is there, our sector is so complicated and huge spectrum we have. You have, national level, large organizations which are run very professional way. Then you also have people at grassroots who are doing excellent work, but they don't believe in so many things in which in our new value we say hona chahiye. Now, how to take everyone together, that is a very important thing. Now, in our case, in Vani, that's why writing it's the oldest network. So we have experienced everything where the grassroots organization, sometimes they say, is there someone hijacking the network? Do we have a value in that? How we can, what we say is value addition in that? Like people like Gopal Bhai in UP, unko saath leke chalna is a very, that group is very, they have tremendous amount of knowledge and experience. They can contribute a lot in the sector, but they don't get space. But how to take everyone, I think that is a very interesting discussion you all are having. I'm sorry, मैं लिखता जा रहा था, but thanks for giving me chance. But nice to hear, and thank you.
Oh, thanks very much.
Thank you, Sunish. Yeah.
Thanks for coming in, Harsh. And I think it's good to hear that echo from an experienced organization also. Let me move to Kanika. Kanika, do you want to share your milestone success story?
So I think, COVID, I think for me, and this is personal, I don't know whether everyone in the coalition will necessarily agree, but for me, I think at that point during COVID, and of course we know, there was this surge, everyone was at it, and I think we've seen crazy amounts of collaboration at that point. But I think what was happening within the coalition to me was, really interesting. Similarly, this sort of just hearts reaching out to each other, hearts and hands reaching out to each other. But at some point, this sort of organic response turned into this organized collective response, right? It was no longer just bilateral, you need something in Calcutta, here is this in Chennai, which we all needed to do. But also then saying, in the madness of all of that, and the grief and everything, everyone had all of that going on, right? But we also kind of said that, okay, there's something that we have to do collectively here. And it's not, what we're doing is not enough. And I think to me, that was really interesting. And it was also maybe a little bit of a turning point for the coalition itself to respond then collectively, where you can respond as to the best of your ability as the kind of stakeholder you are. So if you're as a donor, what you can do, as someone who's on the grassroots, and we can't do it without each other. There was like, I have money to spend, I don't know where it should go. I need cylinders tomorrow, and I can distribute them within a matter of hours. How do I get them? So just everyone being able to play to their own strengths and being able to see that, and being able to kind of organize ourselves to respond like that, I think was fantastic. And in all of that, also recognizing that what we really needed for ourselves as well as for all those we work with was well-being. And we needed to address that right away. We needed to do it for each other, for ourselves, like I said. So within the coalition, collective well-being, but also in our case, we work with young people, well-being for them. So I think just shifting our entire response strategy, calling it Satnirbhar, saying we're interdependent at a time when people are talking about social distancing. I think to me, that's really the hallmark, that's kind of the most resonating memory of who we are as a coalition. And I think that's the spirit that is a marker of sort of success for me. And numbers and all, whatever they were, I think they sounded pretty good too, but it's not, for me, I think it was just, as I said, the hallmark of the coalition.
Sure. Thanks, Kanika. I'm just told we're running a little late, so I'm going to move to the final question, and this is more to-dos and how-tos. So, is there a structure that works? Coalition is not something which, so people have different structures. Some are very well laid out, some are very loosely held. In your experience, and whoever wants to take this question, is there a structural design that has worked well for you, which you have arrived at after testing, trying different things? Anyone?
I can go, Sunish, maybe, because this is one thing that in the past, we have had 3 successful collectives, okay? At national level, Punjab as a state, Telangana as a state, and now India Education Collaborative. But this is one question that we haven't been able to figure out yet. With Punjab Education Collective, it was our first effort towards working as a collective, and we just said, we know each other, we are familiar to each other team, and we'll figure it out. And we had a very clear division of roles and responsibilities. Acha Shiksha Lokam ye karega, Mantra ye karega, Sanjay Sikhya will do this, Samartha will do this. But what we realized that what looks very clear division on an Excel sheet, in real life, it's always blurred, right? And that's where the confusion starts to build. And but there, because we knew each other, we were always able to come back, set up a meeting, and then clear things out or solve it on the go. But there was a clear need for such structure. So I'll be keen to hear from Kanika and Anant if they have figured out a structure. But the question that I have for the panelists and actually the wider audience is, and something that I grapple with personally, is that if you again get into these defining structures, defining governance, defining, like Harshji had put a comment on the chat that everybody should have a voice. But the moment you have these structures in, how is that an equal space? And isn't the collective again becoming a separate organization in its own, form? So I think that's something that is an open question in my mind, and would love to hear from anybody in the panel or in the audience if they have experience.
Sure. So let's begin with the panel itself. Kanika, Anand, any reflections there?
No, I mean, I think I fully agree with Khushbu. I think it's one of those that, hasn't necessarily been cracked. I think what we've been quite clear about is that what is needed, whether it's one organization running it or a consortium of organizations or whatever, or just individuals who take those roles, is a firm secretariat. We call it a facilitariat, right? You need someone who's playing that role, where the role is very clear, and that is very much like an organization also. I mean, it's got to be someone's, like I was saying, primary secretary, it's got to be someone's primary membership. I don't think it can be run, a coalition can be run by everyone in that secondary membership role. So I think that's one learning, from trying to also have spaces that are, a little more organic, etc., to saying, okay, no, this part we'll have to do. And I think, an ideal possibly would be if that facilitariat was made up of people from many organizations. And so you could just call it that facilitariat, and the organization would be then not at the center, but also this whole funding piece is an issue there that we'd already touched upon, right? Because the resources will come into one organization, or one organization is prepared to put in those resources. That's the other thing, is you find your own ways of raising resources, but you put them into the coalition, which I think then again, that can be done by an n number of organizations. But roles, having that structure, I think certainly, that to my mind is that's our experience so far.
Thanks, Kanika. So let me open to questions. It's just about time. We have 15 minutes with us, and I'm going to pick up some from the question answers. Would love to hear Khushbu's experience of using tech to enable effective facilitation of collectives. Khushbu, do you have insights there?
Oh, so many. I think in facilitating collectives, so to say, but tech has played a huge role in, remember earlier I spoke about the shared seeing. How are we interpreting the situation on ground, and how are we there designing solutions? Tech, in a very powerful and enabling way, enables that shared seeing by making data available to you, by making evidence available to you almost in real time. And in our work at Punjab Education Collaborative Collective, for example, one of the first projects that we took up as a collective was to say, the secretary told us that, how do you enable visibility for me? Sitting here in Mohali, how do I know what's happening in Ludhiana or Patiala in a school there? And I have my field staff. I have these mentors who visit school, who record data, but all on pen and paper, and I have no clue how to analyze and what to make sense of it once the data reaches to me after 3 months, right? By then the situation has changed on ground. So I think tech is a great enabler where it enables real-time seeing. Second, in any form of collective, and it's my realization, I'm sure Kanika and Anand can come in on this, any collective, if you're doing a project, a program, it requires some sort of a common approach, a common minimum program, so to say. Tech, again, is a great tool in enabling this commonality, in enabling this, so to say, templatization without basically unified, but not uniform, not standardized, right? So there again, tech has really enabled our work. The third point, I would say, in just in enabling communication. All of us say that communication is so key in making sure that we are there's no confusion, that the mission. We are all mission aligned. We are connected always. And tech again is a great tool that can be used for ensuring connectivity and communication. And COVID, I think, proved that to the entire universe. So yes, I mean, I have many other examples, but just being conscious of time.
Completely. Anything to add, Kanika, Anand? All right. I think there's one question. Ashraf left. I think she's left the panel, the session, but she says, as co-facilitators of collectives, what has changed for you as leaders and as a person to do this well? And hand on your heart, what do you find most trying about this role? What is your personal magic you bring to the role? Would want to answer that?
I can perhaps start answering part of it at least. I think what has changed, and including what perhaps was quite difficult, was the idea of letting go, right? I mean, it's nice to talk about trust and participation and all of those things, but to do it, I think, as an individual, as an organization, it requires patience, and it requires the ability to kind of let go. And I think that's been a huge and super interesting journey for me, but for also us at Tasra, to do this, to see how do you kind of keep the organization and keep funders engaged as part of a certain amount of the decision making, but how do you also leverage the expertise and the kind of experience of the NGO leaders themselves in terms of making decisions for the fund? How do you leverage the collective kind of wisdom of the sector in terms of identifying leaders and so on? And I think it's supremely exciting, and it'll be amazing to see kind of where it goes in the next couple of years in terms of this kind of decision making as it pertains to grant making, which has typically been, you know, power concentrated in a few hands.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. And, you know, there used to be this thing about what they don't teach you at Harvard. I think nobody teaches anything about coalitions and this change anywhere in any school. I think it's a phenomenal space. And any of us involved in there is immensely blessed. Anything to add, Kanika, Khushbu?
Yeah, I think you know, it's, both Khushbu and Anand have spoken about this, but this whole inclusion and efficiency piece, because finally we're here also to try and get some things done, but what's the point in doing it if you can't do it with people? And so I think more than how, it's also, it's often just a personal dilemma, right? As a leader, as someone who's holding the space and facilitating the space, because you really are trying to do your best to do both, but you are often you'll screw up. I mean, one is just honest, mistakes will happen. And the other is, you know, how you don't often get to explain your intent enough for people to view it as, is this inclusive, or is this efficient, or is this a reason, or this or that. So I think there is a little bit of, and again, it's, I mean, I'm only talking from personal, you know, sort of my standpoint. I think that's always like, that is a personal dilemma for me. And I think the other one is that I have not cracked for sure is just addressing conflict. Like, how do we put conflict on the table, and how do we hold each other accountable, even if it is, even in that secondary membership role, because even within that, you've agreed on some things, you said you'll do some things, right? And I think so much of that, because we cannot carry that conflict transformation or whatever we may do in organizations, it's not as easy to bring into coalition. And I think maybe that's a key lever we are missing. And maybe that's where, like, to me, that's, I feel like that that could be like the real energy source for thriving collectives, if we can just find a way to do that well. Put conflict on the table, address it, transform it, move from there to, you know, a conflict positive kind of situation. So yeah, I think these two things.
Thanks, Kanika. Well said. Anant? Oh, sorry, Anant already answered that question. Khushbu.
I think one completely, absolutely what Anand said, just letting go. Because in an organization, you operate with certain values, certain principles, certain way of your own theory of change, which is very common. But the moment you get into a collective, there are so many theories of change. And how do you then let the wisdom of the group come forward? I think, I was reading this Krishnamurti's book where he said, ultimately, all of us are human beings and not labels. The moment you realize that, I think just wonderful co-creation and collaboration can happen. And this has been my biggest learning over the last 3-4 years now of being part of such collectives, of such groups, that there's always a reason to find differences. But the moment as leaders, if we are able to establish those similarities, then the cohesion, the trust level just shoots up. And that's something that is very, very critical to any group success. And I mean, there's so many. I think I really believe that even in an organization, within an organization, the kind of leadership values and traits that you hold dear stands true for what you will take to your collective. The idea of agency, you have to make sure that your team members are able to exercise decision making, are able to exercise agency, are able to trust and build trust. It's the same for collective. So actually, at a fundamental level, I don't see there are much differences. It's just about it becomes very, very evident and right in your face in a collective setup.
Thanks, Khushbu. There's one more question in the Q&A. How can leaders of collective bring alignment in the sense of purpose of a larger team? Since you earlier mentioned not necessarily they will have the same motivation as that of leaders. So how can we overcome that trickling effect?
I think what has worked for me is just making it very, very explicit. So over communicate, and second, give responsibilities. I think people love to become responsible for things. And the more you become responsible, the more you speak for something externally, you start taking ownership. And that has really helped.
Thanks. Anything to add, Kanika?
I think also just this not getting tired of retelling that story over and over again. Sometimes it's that because you'll also have people entering at different points, absorbing differently. And we're very worried that last workshop mein to bol diya tha, ya last meeting mein to keh diya tha, and now it's got to be something totally new. So I think just that we've got to keep saying it sometimes.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think we've come to the close of it, but I just to sum up, I think one is, I think your point early on, Kanika, about being together as much as, as important as doing things together, I think says a lot and talks to also Khushbu's point just now about, we are all people. I think the moment you put a lot of structure, and we were talking about the architecture that works, is when you move away from people and start looking at people who are subservient to a structure. And there comes the power dynamic, there comes the responsibility, there comes something else. Takes the essence of being together away. So I think, yes, a mission-oriented coalition would write their success as achieving the mission. But then there is another metric possibly, which sometimes is not so, sometimes just apparent, is being together and bringing that energy on board. Also, how can you do together without being together, right? So you got to keep that intact. Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for bringing your insights, your learnings. I know it's a growing and learning space, continues to be one. And I think more conversations around coalitions and what different aspects to different perspectives are coming through will only make the space grow. I also hope personally that it becomes some kind of a formalized body of knowledge, just being together. Why can't we talk about it in institutions, for example, colleges? And So there's that opportunity for sure. So thanks very much, all three of you. Thank you everyone who's joined this conversation, both on Facebook as much as here. And I enjoyed it thoroughly, and hopefully we'll meet again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shubham, please stop the live stream.